A reading from The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. There is a certain typical hero sequence of actions which can be detected in stories from all over the world and from many periods of history. Essentially, it might even be said that there is one archetypal mythic hero whose life has been replicated in many lands by many, many people. A legendary hero is usually the founder of something. The founder of a new age, the founder of a new religion, the founder of a new city, a founder of a new way of life. In order to found something new, one has to leave the old and go in quest of the seed idea, a germinal idea that will have the potential of bringing forth that new thing. The founders of all religions have gone on quests like that. The Buddha went into solitude and then sat beneath the Bo tree, the tree of immortal knowledge, where he received an illumination that has enlightened all of Asia for 2,500 years. After baptism by John the Baptist, Jesus went into the desert for 40 days. And it was out of that desert that he came with his message. Moses went to the top of a mountain and came down with the tablets of the law. Then you have the one who founds a new city. Almost all the old Greek cities were founded by heroes who went off on quests and had surprising adventures, out of which each then founded a city. You might also say that the founder of a life, your life or mine, if we live our own lives instead of everybody else's life, comes from a quest as well.
The circle, it's a widely used religious symbol. It stands for the movement of time, just as the planets move around the sun. The circle is often invoked at wedding ceremonies when the rings are exchanged. The ring is an unbroken circle, a symbol of the unending love that the couple is committing themselves to. Circular temples, the whirling dervishes, the circling of the Arab pilgrims around the Kaaba, they all reflect this movement of time, this movement of the universe. The circle also symbolizes the continual development of creation. It is an image of which has no beginning and no end. It is a symbol of eternity. Circles also define. We say the inner circle, knowing there can be an invisible line drawn to define an in-group and an out-group. There are the Confucian-centric circles of compassion. If you are reading along with us in Karen Armstrong's book, The 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, you will have discovered in this second step, look to your own world, the concentric circles of compassion that come from the Confucian tradition. They emanate out from the family to eventually encompass the entire community. Some religious ceremonies actually draw a circle, a magical circle, a protective measure to keep dangerous powers out and to hold love in. We often invoke here the sacred circle without actually drawing that circle. We understand it to be a set-aside time, the circle of the beloved community. Our task as human beings, according to Albert Einstein, is to free ourselves from the delusion of being outside of the circle of the entire universe. This delusion of being separate and alone. He says this delusion is a sort of prison. In Einstein's words, our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Our task is to draw the circle wide. To accomplish this task, we need the guidance of those who have gone before us, the sages, the prophets, who have left the comfort of the world they once knew, embarking on the hero's journey to the center of the self. Joseph Campbell said that there is a certain typical hero sequence of actions which can be detected in stories from all over the world and from many periods of history. The hero decides to leave home to seek answers to life's big questions. Along the way, the hero will experience loss, pain, rejection, and danger. The archetypal mythic hero teaches us how to leave the comfort of home, to expand our circle of compassion, and how to be the hero of our own life. The story of the prodigal son is not usually told as the story of the archetypal mythic hero. It is usually told as a cautionary tale. Don't be a squanderer like that bad prodigal son. I mean, that's what prodigal means, right? A spendthrift, a waster. It's an odd message because it's supposed to be teaching us compassion. Don't be like the prodigal son, and yet your father will still love you when you come back home. But it's really bad to do all those things that the prodigal son does. So don't do them. Personally, I think the prodigal son has gotten a bad rap. So he asks his father for his inheritance now, which is not the same as what the older brother would get, by the way. If you look at this story in its historical context, the older brother inherits more. The most the youngest brother could get would be maybe about 1/3 of the estate. The biblical text indicates that in response to his youngest son's request, the father actually gave both sons their inheritance. And so he was left with nothing and would have to depend on the oldest son to support him. The youngest son's request is outrageous, but the father's response is even more outrageous. Maybe the father trusted his son, or maybe he is the ideal forgiving father who loves without condition. This is the father who traditional Christianity wants us to name as God. In naming the father in this story God, there were interpretations by the early church which have led some scholars to wonder if Jesus actually told this story. Some scholars wonder if maybe it was placed later in the gospel by the early church. The early church liked to tell this story because they felt the younger son represented the church and the older son represented the synagogue. The father shows his preference for the younger son, just as God the Father made a new covenant which replaced the old. Now, this interpretation from the early church is not only dangerous, it also ignores the context of the story and the mythic possibilities of the story. The parable of the prodigal is one of 3 parables told that defend Jesus' habit of hanging out with sinners, the bad people, the marginalized, the people not like us, the people on the outside of the circle. Those people are the same sort that the youngest son hung out with when he went away. Most of us do leave the nest, the dovecote, the comfort of home, Most of us have felt our wings pass through all distance and fear in the course of our wanderings, in the words of Rilke's poem. Now, this is not always such a bad thing, and I think Jesus knew this when he told the story, if he told the story, because the scholars aren't really sure. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if Jesus told the story or not, because it is one of those timeless stories that reaches far beyond fact into the realm of mythology, into a universal truth that becomes known through experience. We all must leave home and set out on a quest to be the founder of our own life. Again, these words from the poet. Dove that ventured outside, flying far from the dovecote. Housed and protected again, one with the day, the night, knows what serenity is. For she has felt her wings pass through all distance and fear in the course of her wanderings. The parable of the prodigal son appears in only one of the canonical Gospels, the Gospel of Luke, which is known as the Gospel of the Poor. When the youngest son spent all of his money, he was poor. When the famine came, he was hungry, so hungry that he was willing to eat what the pigs ate. So hungry, he was willing to return to his father's house as a servant. He spent his father's inheritance all right. He gave up a life of comfort and security and learned what it is to experience loss, like the Buddha, who left his princely life, like Jesus, who went off to the desert, like Muhammad, who withdrew for a time apart. The prodigal son goes on a quest. Now, this quest is usually judged as the overindulgent, wasteful living of a spoiled frat boy, but it is a quest nonetheless. And the prodigal returns home changed by where he has been. I defend the prodigal son not only because I am the youngest prodigal daughter, but because I know that spending his father's inheritance is not just about spending money. It's also about losing the part of his parents' inheritance that are not his to keep. We inherit so much more from our parents than money. Some of us, like the poor in Jesus' stories, will not inherit money from our parents, but we will inherit thoughts and attitudes, ways of being, and sometimes maybe even a religion. The youngest son loses the part of his father's inheritance that would have hardened his heart to the plight of the poor and the hungry. The youngest son wins back his own heart, the won-back heart of Rilke's poem. He wins back his own heart because of all he is willing to give up. Part of what he gave up when he came home. The prodigal returns willing to humble himself before his father. The prodigal returns no longer thinking only of himself and his self-preservation. The end of the story of the prodigal is open-ended, as I said when telling the story to the kids this morning. It ends with the older son, the dutiful one, the one that stayed at home. It ends with him standing at the threshold. He's deciding whether he will join the party or not. Let go of how he's feeling and join in the celebration. It ends before we know what kind of young man this prodigal will turn into, has turned into now that he's no longer the prodigal. The family is restored, but it will never be the same, because what was lost has now been found. Heavier by the weight of where he has been, the hero returns. Thousands of would-be heroes leave their homes every day for the promise of a new life. Now, theirs is not the conventional pattern of the mythical hero, which, according to Joseph Campbell, always includes departure, fulfillment, and return. This departure for the migrant who is leaving home to find work to support their family may be a little bit different than our conventional hero. May be different when departure comes when a political refugee leaves, seeking asylum. There are countless reasons for leaving home, including to become a migrant worker or to flee religious, political, and social persecution. And there is a new category for a person to decide to leave home. It is the person who leaves because of climate change. Right now, there is a couple in New Zealand who are trying to stay there because their country, the country they left, is disappearing under a rising ocean. This couple, the man and his wife, are from Kiribati, a remote chain of islands in the Pacific, halfway between Hawaii and Australia. It is one of the lowest lying nations on Earth, and as such, it is one of the first nations that will likely disappear as ocean levels rise. Kiribati has a population of only about 103,000 people, and it is one of the poorest countries in the world. So this 37-year-old man and his wife moved to New Zealand 6 years ago on work visas and have had 3 children while living there in the last 6 years. They have petitioned to stay, but the New Zealand immigration authorities have already rejected their petition twice because they do not recognize this category of climate change refugee. The UN High Commission for Refugees defines a refugee this way, and this is quoting from their material. Someone with a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, and is outside the country of his nationality, and is unable to, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. This definition, as you probably heard, does not include climate change refugees. So the case of this couple from Kiribati could be precedent-setting. The UN also estimates that as global temperatures continue to rise, there could be as many as 330 million people displaced worldwide. Their definition of refugee will need to change. The conventional pattern of mythical hero is departure, fulfillment, and return. The unconventional pattern of the everyday immigrant hero certainly includes departure, only sometimes includes fulfillment. It also often includes a sort of enslavement. Undocumented immigrant workers are subject to abusive working conditions because their employers can just threaten them with deportation if they complain. Industries that employ large numbers of immigrant workers, like poultry processing and meat packing, often do not pay employees for all the time they work, and they expose workers to unsafe working conditions. Here is an alarming statistic from the U.S. Department of Labor, which shows that immigrants from Mexico are killed on their jobs in the U.S. at a rate 75% higher than that of workers who were born here. Departure, fulfillment, and return. Return is also unconventional for this immigrant hero. There are 11 million undocumented people living in our country. And even as our government has been shut down this week, and I guess now we're calling it a partial shutdown, the media has changed their language around that, I noticed this morning. In the partial shutdown, the deportations have not stopped. 1,100 people a day are still being deported. Families live in constant fear, never knowing when ICE will come and take parents away, leaving children in already overcrowded foster care. Often immigrant families are separated for decades without a legal path for unification. Undocumented young adults are often deported to foreign lands they left as infants, deported to places they do not know and to languages they do not speak. Are they heroes or are they criminals? All of us are heroes, according to Joseph Campbell. The hero's adventure is the adventure of being alive. The hero's reward, the treasure unearthed during this adventure, is compassion. In dreams, the circle is a symbol of the self, the highest self, and indicates the end of the process of individuation, of striving towards a psychic wholeness and self-realization. The hero's journey ending with a return to home, a return to self. In religious symbolism, the circle represents eternity, the ongoing act of creation. Our task as human beings, according to Albert Einstein, is to free ourselves from the delusion of being outside of the circle of the entire universe. The delusion of separateness is a sort of prison. In Einstein's words, our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Our task is to draw the circle wide. May it be so, and amen. Yesterday, as we were walking back from the witness in our yellow t-shirts, we had a conversation with some of the people from the other congregations, knowing that our Standing on the Side of Love campaign was very successful, continues to be successful when we focus on marriage equality. That's something that most of us agree with. The other part of the campaign, this Standing on the Side of Love campaign, is immigration is a moral issue, immigrant justice. This is, for Unitarian Universalists, perhaps not as easy. And perhaps it shouldn't be as easy. It's a very complicated issue. And so I just want to acknowledge that as we move through this year of compassion together, as we have conversations about what is going on in our world, what is going on in our state, the justice issues that this congregation chooses to be involved in, that we remember compassion. And as we talk to our leaders, as we talk to Congress, as we talk to them after they really get back to work, I want to let you know that in the secular world there is a call for comprehensive immigration reform, but in our world there's a call for comprehensive and compassionate immigration reform. Please join me in saying the words to extinguish the chalice, which are printed in your order of service.
We are the Caneo Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. Like us on Facebook, check out our website at CVUUF.org, or come visit us. See you soon!